between September and December. We should get a lot more information back, and then maybe between September and December, we have a special Zoom meeting to discuss the recommendations after we have more information and compile it together. How does that sound?
I think it's kind of early.
Yeah.
I think the only thing we have that we can talk about is recommendations is the timing right now.
Well, we need to make some recommendations to put in the legislative report. I mean, the best we can come up with at that time. That's something we're obligated to do, and we really haven't done a very good job of it. So we should, you know, we can put all kinds of caveats on it, but from what we have learned, this is what we would recommend or what we think is coming up. And we need to do that for the February report, but we could summarize that up by the December meeting. Maybe have a meeting between September and December, the special Zoom to talk about that after we get more information back in, which we should get September meeting.
I think we've heard a couple of things that are also useful for recommendation, which are negative data. You know, for example, I think the finding of the Elk River study that the low water isn't all that bad. This is an important recommendation. Yeah, and then I also think that Michael Blumen's finding that maybe we're barking up the wrong tree with some of this. I'm not sure if, you know, if I agree with that or not, but that is true. That means, okay, let's not go in that direction anymore. That's also a very useful recommendation.
Well, that's a good recommendation. Didn't come out exactly like we expected. It's some honest results coming out of it. That,
I also thought about the oil, even if it was worse than it was a little bit. It's like a lot of the hatcheries now, because of warming and global warming and stuff, it's like they're having to ship fish all over in a place where they're cool. And if you had a well that you just use just for cool water during that 1 year period, I mean, if it won't do any harm, that'd be a good lick, really.
Okay with you?
That's for the board.
So we just change your stuff around a little bit.
Yep. Totally makes sense to me. Yeah. We got enough stuff to keep us busy.
All right. Okay. Moving on.
I'm still trying to confirm whether the people online can hear us. Anybody on? Is there anybody online that can confirm that they have audio?
Yep. Yeah, we can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
There's a message that popped up. Yeah, Seth wrote that he can hear us, but we can't hear. I cannot hear you, Seth, but so you all heard us. Yeah. So for now, go ahead and online people use the chat if you want to say anything. And in the meantime, we'll rustle up Jen to see if she can help us with the speaker, but I think we're good to go. So, operator. Okay.
By the way, we're waiting. Seth and I usually spend quite a few hours talking before the meeting, setting up the agenda and talking about speakers. And any of you just call in to either of us or ring and anything. If you have any ideas of speakers or topics or anything you'd like us to cover, don't make it be setting an agenda on our own. We're just looking for all the input we can get, so feel free.
Okay, that should be good. Sorry, I forgot I was on the agenda. I'll be quick. We did staffing already. We had a homeschool group come out in April. It was the first class that Zach had done. He did a great job. I taught one of the dissection courses, and then he went ahead and took the second one. And afterwards, he was like, that was a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be. And the kids got way more into it than he expected. So he had a good time. We did free fishing day. Just about 100 people signed in, and it was a really nice day. Everybody caught fish. Everybody was really happy to be back. It was the first one that we'd advertised since COVID. We thought maybe people made plans for that week outside of free fishing day because we hadn't done one in a few years. So maybe that'll up again next year, but it was about double what we had last year. So that was encouraging.
Where did you fish?
Thistle Pond. And then if you're 5,
You didn't have it outside the door here, right?
you do. If you're 5, you get those guys. The first fish that a little kid caught out of there was a 26-inch, 5.6 pound. It was about like that. Fishes like that. So it was pretty fun. But we had way more staff than people. I think at one point there was somebody that worked with Michelle and Crystal, and he brought his daughter, and I was talking to somebody inside the lobby and watched all 7 of the staff follow this one little girl over to help her catch her fish. So we had a lot of enthusiasm from the people that were there too. It was a lot of fun. We hosted the aquatic inventories group from ODFW for their training here again this year. They brought 25 people or something to stay upstairs, do training. They were able to utilize Fall Creek and Skunk Creek down there, that bridge that you go over as you're leaving. They were able to utilize that for their training, so habitat survey training and survey and stuff. So that was really good to have them out here. We have a class coming out July 24th to do dissections, tours. Seth is going to help with that. There's going to be a salmon trout advisory committee meeting here in October. There's something else in October that I can't remember what it was. And then, like Michael was saying, we'll do the fall festival again this year. We haven't done that since 2019, so that'll be fun to have that back in the building as well. That's the first weekend in November, and I can send information out as we get that, but we'll be planning that.
On the fall festival, on the tour, Jen was talking about the magnetite and the tower. One of the artists that we got from Portland this year works with magnetite in her ceramics, and she's going to be doing magnetite painting with the public, and so we'll get a chance to integrate some of the science with art.
And then we've been working on some facility improvements as we can, as far as money and stuff goes. We just did a rewire of the electrical in the tank farm. Prior to last week, there are 6 outlets out there, and they were all on the same circuit. So you're limited to, say, 5 recirculating pumps at a time, no matter where you plug them in. And we plugged the pickup truck into one of those. And so if, for example, your block heater melts to the frame of your truck, it shorts and you lose power in the whole tank farm. So everything is now on its own circuit, which means instead of 5 tanks, we can actually have like, or 5 pumps, we can run 30, if we own 30, which we don't, and that's okay. So that was a good thing that happened, and the truck is on its own, so fish and vehicle are separate now. We just had our internet servers replaced. Andy, the Wi-Fi no longer goes off in the middle of the night. Don't know why, but they changed that. And we're working on getting wireless for the facility wide. So we've extended into the shop for the first time, which is great. And then hoping to get it into the tank farm and the parking lot and all the way up to the intake. And then something we can do at that point is install like a wireless camera that looks at the river. So in the event that we have another 2020 event and we need to evacuate, we're not coming back the next day and saying, "Oh look, is it okay or not, as we drive up the road, we can go online and access that and see. So that's a safety thing that we're gonna implement, once we can get the company
So
lined up.
how are you going to put the camera in a place where it will never be displaced by whatever flood we get?
The fish ladder and that big old building there, I can strap it to the building. So that should be okay. And we're getting the houses replumbed right now, actually. The inflow was really small for serving 2 houses, so we're getting that replaced so that quality of life increases, you actually get the appropriate amount of water to your house. And then finally, we did finish the adult season. We didn't get a whole lot more since the last meeting. I think we had about 14 more steelhead come through. Got this weird little shot right at the beginning of May. But we ended up with 1,841 total fish handled, 366 Chinook, 1,248 coho, and 94 steelhead. So all of those above average for us. Coho really
Sarah,
high.
can you tell us
above average.
back and write those down?
366 Chinook, 1248 coho, 94 steelhead. At some point, I will finish updating our website with our fish counts, but I don't think I've put in probably March, April, or May yet. So I'll get those final numbers of steelhead in there at some point.
Isn't that like an unusual spike for coho?
Yes. Yeah, we probably average, the last couple of years have been really good, so our average has probably gone up to, it's got to be more like 300 or 400 average coho, but the numbers I remember were like 250 or something. Is an average. It was crazy. There was one week I think we did like 350 or 400 fish in that week. We looked in there and there's not that many, and 144 fish that day. When the very first year I was here, I think our entire run for all species like that was 256 or something. So it's progressively gotten better over the last couple of years, which is really, really nice to see. And there's a lot of little coho out in the river, so
Yeah.
we'll hope that it keeps going.
Yeah, so
Okay, I am going to, thanks, Jen.
Yes.
Or I need the
Here we go.
presentation,
Which one do you want?
same presentation.
This one?
So, while Jen is loading that up, Mark Johnson and Kathleen O'Malley are both at the West Coast Genetics Conference in Boise, Idaho this week. So both of them regret that they couldn't be here, maybe. But Mark usually gives the budget update, and so he gave me the slides, so I'll walk you through those. I have not presented the budget before, so it's it's a different presentation. All right, I might need to get Jen again. Sorry, you're seeing my AV incompetence in real time. so we'll just take 2 minutes. Okay, thanks for bearing with me. These are the OHRC Research Fund revenue that you're used to seeing that mostly come from license purchases. And you can see there is a very cyclical nature to that. It seems to be just kind of bouncing around as it does in previous years. When I look at this, I notice that beginning in April, the fund goes up quite a bit, and I assume that's when people are buying their licenses. At least that's when I buy my license. It looked like last year in April of the spring to summer of 2022, the license purchases didn't peak as much as they do in normal years. So it looked like the revenue was down a little bit, but it also looks like the January through March of 2023 was really similar to what it was last year. So we'll see what happens with that. Hopefully we see another peak there. And I'm not exactly sure how much this is directly tied to the license purchases. I know there's some other
It's also
financials.
the abnormal tax on commercial harvest, on commercial price per pound, but I'm not sure when the fish, when the harvest is done and when the revenue is recorded.
When it gets put into the
Yeah.
bank
Oh, so
account.
there'll be a shortfall this year because of the fishery closures.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, hopefully that closed that after everybody bought their license. Sorry, we did buy before. Yeah. I don't have, thank you, Amy. I don't have a lot of other insight on this graph. So I know we have Sean Clements on the phone here. Sean, if there's anything that you felt like we should mention here about the revenue, then feel free to speak out. Okay.
Hey, sorry, Seth. Just getting off mute. Yeah, nothing much to add other than we're expecting this to be pretty stable relative to the last couple of biennia, based on current license sales and projections going forward. We're slightly below this year, but we had a really wet spring too and cold. It wasn't ideal fishing conditions, so it's starting to pick back up.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so spending. This is the spending of the OHRC Research Fund. And that includes the operational small projects and also the big projects that the board has voted on. And all the projects are underspent and on time. So that's one really good thing to know. And this is just the cyclical nature of when those money were spent. You can see that there is an increase in spending as we approach spring of 2023, and that makes sense to me because that's the end of the research biennium, and that's when people are hoping to kind of make sure that they've utilized the funds that are in this research. So, but yeah, as the numbers that Mark shows me, all the research projects are on budget or slightly under budget. So yeah, we're in the green as far as that goes. Any questions about budget that I probably can't answer, but I'll try or write down in my notebook if I can. All right.
Okay, moving on to the next segment, the landslide discussion.
Oh, yeah. All right. Okay. This is just an update, kind of relaying the outcomes of the April 13th meeting that we had at the last board meeting. I let everybody know that we were organizing this meeting here at the OHRC. It had the goals of basically pulling everybody together to just talk about the history and the issues related to the landslide. And Jen talked a little bit about it on the tour. Because there's a bunch of newer players, myself included, we thought it was just a good time to reconvene and kind of get the history and get everybody kind of on the same page and understanding what the issues actually are and how big or not big of a deal it is, and also to identify potential scenarios for the landslide, including, if we can, to assign relative likelihoods to the different scenarios. And then, if possible, brainstorming what might be mitigation strategies for different scenarios. And we had pretty good representation there. We had Oregon State University, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Oregon Department of Forestry, Weyerhaeuser, Lincoln County, and then of course OHRC staff and myself participated in that. Overall, there were 17 people. We had it in this room, and it included an in-room meeting, but also a tour out to the bottom of the slide of Fall Creek. So sorry for the small font for the people in the room, that might be hard to see, but essentially after the welcome and introductions, Susan Shaw from Weyerhaeuser gave a really comprehensive background of the landslide, including the kind of underlying geology and the hill slope and the topography of the basin that could have contributed to the slide. And her portion of the presentation went from the slide initiation in 2017 all the way to 2020. And then she handed the relay off to Ben Lashinsky. Ben is a forest engineer at Oregon State University, who is the one who's actually instrumenting the slide. So he has, monitoring equipment up there and has been keeping track of it really closely from 2020 to the present. So we got presentations from both of them. Ben presented a bunch of modeling scenarios for different situations of the slide, including backcasting a model that predicted the 2020 event as well. So he presented all of that work with what he felt were like some likelihoods, and I'll get into that a little bit. Jen here talked about her first hand account of the 2020 event and how the emergency response and the coordinated communication went after that. And then that discussion also included Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife that provided their perspective, and a lot of drone imagery that Eric Suring has been flying out around the area, which was pretty interesting. We had part of the agenda was set aside just for discussing the hazard response systems and the coordination and communication. And I was incredibly impressed by how good that was and how well the water alarm systems worked for Jen in the 2020 situation, but then also the efficiency and necessary redundancy of the communication amongst the county and the Department of Forestry, and letting all the members of the public and the people in the watershed know if something was happening in the watershed. Then we had, after that, an open discussion of different scenarios, the likelihoods, and we talked about a bunch of different mitigation measures that might be possible. And then a few of us that stayed around walked up to the landslide and looked at it. And of course, that's where all the most interesting conversation happened. But we don't have enough time in this meeting for me to go through all of this information. There was a lot there. We have those presentations from the researchers, so if anybody after the meeting wants to look at them in more detail. But I thought I would just kind of show you, first of all, like an aerial to give you an idea of what the slide looks like. So the what you're looking at is Fall Creek going off to the west. The OHRC would be far to the right and below. So nothing that we saw presented puts the OHRC directly in danger of material that would come down from the landslide. The issue instead is more about, at one extreme of the scale, a dam forming on the river, and then the river bursting through the dam and causing a flood pulse to come down and create a flood in this area and down lower, or water turbidity issues. off to the top right, where it says mid-slope deep-seated landslide, that's kind of the main center of the big landslide. And then in 2020, that long channel that's going all the way down to the stream basically was created. But then the stuff that you see in red up there, which is not really that visible from the air, is what is creating the water turbidity. So that's a lot of like smaller geological blocks that are unstable and kind of, you know, connected to a lot of connected water that's pulling that water down through and over the road and creating the muddy water upstream. So I have actually a couple of pictures of that. I'm not sure how well we'll be able to see it, but the picture on the bottom right is actually showing what it looks like when you look up that landslide scar. But the water that's actually coming out of there is a tributary, and that water is perfectly clear. It's really interesting. If you go up there at any time when the water is murky, that water is like crystal clear. You could put your drinking water cup in there and take a sip if you wanted to risk giardia. But then upstream, if you go up, the water in Fall Creek is clear, but that's where the muddy water is actually getting into stream. So that's actually the source of the water turbidity issues right now. So we talked about, you know, all these different scenarios, all the way from, you know, how likely is it that we're going to have persistent water turbidity issues to how likely is it there would be a mass failure of the stream like we saw in 2020 or even bigger that might create a dam and cause a flood, basically come down towards the center. And this is not anything official, and this is not the consensus of the group. This is my kind of personal takeaway from having convened that meeting and all of the discussions that I had with the geologists and the modelers and everything. The first takeaway is there's a low but non-zero risk of a catastrophic hill slope failure. Ben Lashinsky, who presented those models, said several times in the meeting that he felt like the likelihood of the catastrophic scenario was low, but it's still there. It's still a non-zero risk. The second takeaway is that there was very likely persistent and lasting water turbidity issues during intense rain that's concurrent with cold weather from November through March. So that's probably not something that's going to go away anytime soon. It could stick around for, you know, years to come. Who knows how long. The third takeaway that I kind of felt at that meeting was that there was an extremely well functioning hazard communication and response protocols in place, like I mentioned. And the fourth one is that we did discuss some mitigation measures, things that we could do not at the hatchery itself, but upstream of the hatchery between the landslide and the hatchery that might help with reducing the sediment. Some of those were discussed. There were some good ideas. They seemed, some of them, promising. One of the ideas was moving the water intake upstream of the water turbidity issues. A lot of hatcheries do that, like the Bonneville hatchery, I guess, gets its water about a mile upstream up Eagle Creek, so they know that they're getting clean water. But of course, these would require funding. So all of the solutions that we talked about, they all, you know, required some level of input of, you know, financial resources. So that's kind of the takeaway there, and we kind of just left it there for now. So we're at this point in a space of kind of thinking about what we're going to do and how we're going to pivot and what the solution is for the OHRC, but we haven't really gotten too much traction since this point. So
I didn't attend in person, but I listened to the whole presentation on Zoom, and having spent 47 years in timberland management, watched a lot of slides, and listening to the geologists at this meeting, I think they did an excellent job. Actually, they were very thorough, and I think the Weyerhaeuser people are super conscientious about what's going on too. And I think the risk of a catastrophic event is very, very low. And but it is, like I said, it is there. I mean, there's always that possibility, but it's likely to occur in the, because it's gonna occur in the months we have heavy rain. It's not gonna be happening now, so I would suggest that, you know, we probably don't have a lot of public attendance here. I mean, big meetings with a lot of folks in the facility during those high-risk months, but, you know, the rest of the time of the year, it's probably very safe or no, very little risk of any catastrophic event. As far as turbidity, it's probably going to exist, but, you know, I've had some success in the past getting money from the public and timber industry and things like that. And I wouldn't put it by the possibility of getting a lot of help funding, putting a pipeline from up above the other side of the slide down into here to handle the water for the facility. At least take that to be studied, see what it costs, see what kind of contributions we might be able to get for something like that.
How far will the pipe need, how long will the pipe need to be?
I believe the, so the landslides, I'm not going to be able to give you an exact number, but it's something I can follow up on. The bottom of the blue runout is about a half-mile upstream of here. So it might be just about as far again to where the turbid water is coming in. Because that whole hillside is, the whole hillside on that upstream side of the watershed is at what they call like a dip slope orientation. So the blocks of geology are aligned perfectly to create more of a slide. The intake pipeline would need to be on the other side of the stream, and there's not a road there. So building an intake pipe would also involve building road, basically, so you could access it. So I'd say more than a mile, but how much more, I'm not sure.
This barrier also. Earlier in this presentation, we talked about warehouses placing electronics near the slide to send a signal. Does Jen, does she have that electronics in her offices so she could be early warned?
Yeah, so we talked about that at the meeting. Good point. Right now, the monitoring system is a low water pressure monitor at the intake, which works seemingly really reliably, and it has redundant power sources. We did talk about, I guess in the gorge, they have this, it's like an electric fence. It gets an alarm if like rocks start falling on it. Jen was a little bit opposed to that because she didn't want another alarm to wake her up on the weekends. Apparently those kind of alarms get set off a lot involuntarily, and they're really good with letting you know something happened, but there's a lot of false positives. And then there might have been some issues with the communication system just because of satellite and cell coverage being a little bit spotty. So the aquatic inventory group that came out here, one of their members is developing with USGS a water alarm based on the cameras that Jen was talking about. So that's one potential avenue, but that would be a layer on top of the low water alarm, which we already enforce.
There's also monitors that are on the slide itself, so if there's any movement that alerts warehouse.
I don't believe there's any kind of remote alert. The monitors that Ben and Lashinsky have, or you have to go into the field to check them. It's basically like a cable and winch system, so you can see how far different blocks of land are moving apart or coming together.
Well, they've come a long way to what they have now. Do you remember, Scott, when that first happened?
Yeah.
And warehouses, people were here, and one of their solutions. I had grade school kids here with aquariums and stuff. And they said, if that should happen, that slide should happen to start moving, don't drive down the road in your vehicle. Go up these banks. Well, you get a bunch of third and fourth graders trying to go up a deer trail on a muddy bank. It just wasn't an acceptable solution. So it's come a long way since then.
Yeah, to minimize the risk, you just wouldn't have those events during periods of heavy rain. Would bring the kids up. So what's next on this? Or something?
I don't have anything else prepared. I know it seems kind of anticlimactic.
Was there any discussion outside of public safety on like long-term fisheries or operational impacts at the center? Just think about that. Like I use the river a lot in the winter down here, and the turbidity to me didn't really follow just high flow events. I mean, it's pretty persistent a lot of the winter. And just thinking about like impacts to fisheries resources in Fall Creek, and then also how that, you know, we're out there looking at the settling pond. Well, that's going to be a bigger and bigger issue moving forward if there's heavy sediment loads for long term. So
yeah,
it's kind of think about the future maintenance needs, or if there's anything that needs to be done to make things work in the future.
Yeah. You mean regarding the facility or regarding the fishery?
Well, I think both. I mean, so it's really, I think there's two approaches. Is there a way to stop the turbidity or mitigate that? And then are there things that just we need to think about moving forward with the facility itself?
Yeah. So the April 13th meeting, I kind of intentionally drew a boundary on, okay, we're not really talking about things once the water reaches the facility, but like upstream at the landslide or nearby downstream. But we did have a earlier meeting with Jen and Ryan Couture and a couple of other folks that came down, and we did a walkthrough, and we kind of talked about a number of different potential things that you could do in the hatchery itself. Like Jen talked about the drum filter. The issue with that is that you can't get a filter small enough, right, because that stuff is really fine. And if you could, the flow rate would be so low that it just wouldn't really do enough water. We did talk about, you know, potentially tapping into other spring water. I guess ODF&W has a spring right to a spring that used to feed the old hatch box when this was a hatchery. We talked about recirculating aquaculture. We talked about other filtration things that can be done at the research center itself. But again, it always comes down to the bottom line and funding it and whether that's possible.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and regarding the fishery itself, we haven't ever really focused on that, but it's a really good point because, you know, egg to fry survival is just completely linearly or even exponentially related to sediment.
Yeah, and even juveniles, I mean, they're well adjusted to spending short term, you know, with that kind of turbidity, but when it extends in the long term, feeding and growth like tends to slow and cease. And so, yeah, I mean, it's definitely thinking down the road of what, you know, you're saying we're having large runs of fish in Fall Creek right now, but.
Well, and I think to that point, it's such a large run and they're earlier, and I think they're going up further than they have in the past. So in the past, when we've only had 20 Chinook come back and we see 15 or 20 spawning in the back, and we only passed 20, that's not very many getting past this.
Yeah.
Right, but if 366 had the opportunity to get past that, that's a much higher number than the past.
Yeah, I think historically, I mean, when I've driven up to the center, it's in the fall, you see all the hatchery or all the Chinook spawning along the road.
Yeah.
all the way up, and I bet you passed way fewer fish in those years.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's still a bunch in the back.
Right.
But, you know, I think the past way more.
So maybe they're already adapting to that heavier sediment load by just utilizing different habitat.
Further, yeah, I know. But I do hope that, you know, we walk up there periodically because like it's a nice free,
Sure.
you know, my kids aren't gonna get run over by cars up there anymore. And you don't see that many off the side of the road. There are a few, but you just don't see them between the bridge and here very much. So I do think they go by. The other thing I was gonna say is, Ron Griffiths was here last summer to do a sample of macroinvertebrate community again. So he was above the slide, he was below the slide, he was down in Skunk Creek, right out back there, past where we walked. So he should have some information at some point about what's happening with the sediment load and how that's changing. I know the last time he looked at it was 2019 and it wasn't a change yet. So we'll see.
Thanks.
Hey, Scott, maybe you would know this. What's the responsibilities of the landowner under Oregon forest practices?
Nothing that I'm aware of, you know, that they have to take care of downstream or anything. Slides are just a natural event that happens. Any conscientious landowner is going to do everything they can to prevent any kind of danger, that things like that. But we have it actually right on warehousing at the Millicoma Tree Farm. I've been working there for a long time. There's actually a fall creek there. We had a slide. The slide that was probably started by a road that was way up high above. It was probably like 40 acres. Just settled down about 15 feet just overnight. It caused a lot of turbidity in the creek, and it was a big problem. We had to work roads around it and everything. But it took 3 or 4 years. It had the Coos River pretty well muddied up, but eventually it cleared up and it quit. Seems to have stabilized the last 10, 15 years, I suppose. But no, I don't think there's any liability for something that's within their property, and it's kind of a natural event. And often those things are triggered by logging or road construction or something, but a lot of them just occur naturally all up and down the coast anyway. It's like the mountains want to move to the sea around here.
Yeah, my understanding is this one's pretty deep seated and it's more of a geologic event versus caused by forest practices.
That was my impression from Weyerhaeuser, and I didn't feel like I was getting sold it. Like, of course they're gonna say that, but like, I mean, just, it was actually really convincing that, you know, the combination of it being Tyee sandstone and the anti-dip kind of orientation of the blocks, just, and how deep it is, there's just no tree that would ever move that stuff temporarily.
Any other questions about landslide? Kind of keep you updated if anything happens, change. So Seth, you want to talk about Chuck's favorite topic?
Okay, catch box. Because of what you see on the screen, I have not actually gotten as far along as I would like to, but I have done some thinking about it, and Scott, Mr. Chair, and I have talked about a little bit about this back and forth, and I thought maybe it was a good idea to put some just ideas on the board to get people's opinion on thinking about what a workshop might actually look like. The overall idea behind this is that a lot of the step biologists, as I understand it, and the angling associations and other folks are interested in hatch boxes as a way to get fish out into rivers without, you know, raising the eggs letting juveniles emerge from the hatchery. they're raised in a more natural condition, but then some studies have shown that they have a much lower survival rate. So kind of thinking about the sorts of questions that might come out of a workshop, and I got draft questions written up there, meaning these are totally open for discussion. So the first one is, what are the ecological, genetic, and social benefits and risks? So thinking about, these might be tools that could be used in certain places, but like any kind of a tool, you have to think where and when is it appropriate to use. The social part of that is that Scott and others have pointed out to me that these are actually really nice outreach kind of mechanisms for the public, because it's easy to work with them and kids can see them and they can be involved and being part of the fishery and all that. So in addition to whatever kind of harvest or ecological benefits, then they also have a public outreach part. Are they feasible at a production scale? What are the opportunities and barriers? Those would be the main questions. And maybe I'll just run through the whole slide and then kind of open it up for discussion. But the methods would be to start with a literature review. To first of all, whatever questions we come up with, let's see if anybody else has answered them first before we dive too deep into it, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We did already start doing a review of egg to fry survival rates from hatch boxes versus reds. And Mark Johnson actually gets credit for this. So we looked at 12 different studies, and the rates are all over the place and they're not really presentable at this point. But the point is, we are starting to compile some studies and to look at least this one small aspect of hatch boxes. And then after the literature review, we would have the workshop, and the workshop would include tribal, state, federal fishery scientists, including STEP biologists and OHRC board members if they're interested, and public organizations. And then, of course, the reason or the expected outcome of doing something like this at all would lead to a recommended best practices. So when, where, and how would you use these things if they were deemed appropriate? And then at some point, getting those into the management recommendations in the OHRC annual report. And then along the way, as I found, anytime you delve into a subject, obviously there's going to be gaps in information that just can't get answered in either a literature review or a workshop. So if those gaps are identified, then that could potentially lead to a list of future research needs. And that's not just job security for me and my colleagues, really is, I hope we all agree that research is sometimes needed to answer some of these questions. So there's the vision kind of right now, and it's really good time because it's early to get people's opinion on what's up there and this kind of general approach.
I've had legislators and a lot of local people encouraging me to get something going with hatch boxes that were used on the South Coast pretty effectively. At least people thought they were effective, at least for years. And when they cut them out, there seemed to be less pitch around whether or not it's got to be hatch boxes. I'm sure one way or another. But anyway, it's been a lot of pressure. Probably 3 or 4 bills go through the legislature trying to encourage the use of hatch boxes. But then I've dug into all the literature I can find, and Seth and I've been sharing some back and forth, and Steve gave me some information, gave me some links to look up stuff, and there's some that are negative about hatch box use. As far as outreach, I mean, there's no question they were excellent program for kids and everything to use. As far as the effectiveness, the studies that say that they don't work good almost all say why. I mean, they were put in the wrong place, they weren't monitored properly, it was the wrong size, what kind of brood stock was used. So it seems like if you could end up with a proper protocol or best practices, like if you're below carrying capacity, and if there was fish there in the past, but there's not now, and if you put the hatch box, the proper configuration of hatch box you put it in the right location, upper part of the stream, and if you use hopefully wild brood stock eggs, and go through these, if you follow step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it meets all those qualifications, then it's a good tool for the toolbox. If it doesn't, the conditions aren't right for it, but at least you'd have a best practices, a protocol, and if you meet those conditions, people want to use them, we would know how to use them properly. Right now, a lot of them have been misused from what I read, not put in the right place, different problems with them. In fact, but Chuck worked with up here, we had boxes with the wrong size holes in them that had to be adjusted. So a lot of little things like that, but if it's all done right, it works in places. I mean, there's probably no question about it, but we need to know the right way to do it. And that's the outcome I'd like to see come out of this. And then we make that recommendation if all these qualifications are met, should be used, could be used. Yes.
One thing that I would recommend, and you may have already done it, Scott, those hatch boxes are manufactured, they're called a Scotty box, not the Scott, but on Vancouver Island, they're manufactured there, and they have a wealth of information from the Canada side on what they can do and what they use them for, how they set them, what their success is. I don't think they would mind if their research was copied, and it would be a beginning. One of the things on hatch boxes that I always liked is I'm heavily involved with recreational fishermen, different organizations, and when it's easy to get volunteers. Give them a box with a milk carton and what have you. And you'll get a lot of volunteers to set them, like not necessarily on Fall Creek, but up the LC, South Fork, some of those areas. You go up in the creek or a river, and there's no spawning taking place. There's something wrong with that area. It doesn't do you any good to channel spawning fish into it if it isn't being used. So use those, like Scott just said, as a tool. And set out a half dozen of them in this mile of river and see, where the success is. I know there's areas in a lot of the rivers where they don't have fish spawn. Well, do a little research and find out why, and maybe hatch boxes could change that situation. So anyway, it's interesting. Our little group, our LC Sportsmen's Association, here 2 years ago now, we bought that before the membership, and we had a lot of volunteers. So heck yeah, let's do that, So there's no reason that it couldn't be a tool and work. It may not be an answer to all spawning, but it's a supplement. Go.
I took notes.
We have, the creek that runs right through the middle of Salem used to have salmon run. It has a fish ladder underneath the old sawmill where it used to be. What a PR plan that would get some kids from the Dayton High School whose teacher used to put these boxes in, take them up there, get them the right eggs, and dig it right in front of the Capitol. Fish or no fish, just the magic that would come out of that would just do us a lot of good. Could you imagine what they'd say? Some got 10 kids down there and they're putting hatchery boxes in there, and everybody from the state, when they go to lunch, are looking at those damn things. What a PR campaign.
What I, hear from a lot of folks, in fact, it's in the step 2021 report to the legislators. Back in the 80s, there were 10 million unfed fry put out in Oregon, and now there's 64,000. People say there's a hell of a lot more fish in the 80s than there are now. Maybe there's some correlation, whether there is or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's perception.
Actually, coho runs now are stronger than they were in the 80s. Last 3 years, and we got on that.
Wild color,
Yeah,
because they used to talk 12 million hatchet fish.
well, they don't have catch control on the coast.
Right.
Same wild coho
I'm just
production.
saying that you gotta-
Wild coho
you gotta say
production
wild.
now is a lot better than it was in the 80s.
No, the fish is not better.
What's that now?
The fish is not better.
For coho?
For wild coho it is, but the hatchet fish are gone, so it's not as good as it was before then.
They all, you can fish for Clem River fish, one half fish.
Oh, really?
You can. Off Newport.
We do have a teacher who has put those boxes in the past, the wooden ones in. He's up at Dayton High School, Midge Coleman, and he said he was very interested. If you guys want to put something and give him a hand, would be a good, great PR, let's face it. You might even get Tina down there digging some rocks out. Wouldn't that be something?
In the 70s, those were big coho.
That was a live one.
That was big ones. What's the timing on when this workshop will occur? So,
I was hoping nobody would ask me that. I guess I would ask you, what do you think the timing should be on this? Like I guess a little time is freed up because we just decided to delay the management recommendations until after the September board meeting. So maybe this is something that we could get started on. I was thinking that Ashley, who you were introduced to early, would be working with me on the literature review. So we could get started on that right away. I think within the next couple of weeks or so. As far as holding the workshop, I don't know if there's a better time of year for everybody, but fall to winter kind of timeline. Might be good.
We wanted to look at schedules of other meetings.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this particular crowd gets into Oakland thing, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Probably not, but and then it also takes a fair amount of time to get this, you gotta do it right, to organize it. Because you have to plan it out far enough that people are free to come.
Yeah, I think only people in this room that need to be there, are the ones that are particularly interested in it, but mostly would be trying to find everybody from manufacturers, the hatch boxes, to biologists who use them, or people who've done some of the research papers that we've dug out. Get those kind of folks together. It's kind of.
There's also an expense, it can be, are you asking people to come on their own dime, that sort of thing. Depends where you, how far you want to reach on this.
Well, for a 1 or 2 day meeting, I don't know what funds are available. Probably there's something to bring people in for just a day or so, but I don't think it's going to take any longer than that.
I think you'd want to go at least 2 days.
I can check with ODF&W about potentially, providing some kind of support for the visit, because ODF&W is really interested in having a meeting as well.
We've done other workshops here, they've been at least overnight here. And probably what you'd want to do is kind of like the workshop that Mark organized with the proposals. They want to have presentations from people that have done research on this. Then you want to have breakout groups on certain topics.
Steph, It might be worthwhile since you have Megan Jones now as a member of the OHRC to talk to her about facilitation.
Good idea. Yep. I agree. And she just taught a class in facilitation. She wrote the book.
You might also broaden it a little bit to include bear boxes and that sort of thing.
Sorry.
There might also be something to learn from other types of in-stream incubation systems, like bear boxes, that kind of stuff, the old stuff.
The picture that you see on the screen is from a pretty recent publication of the Shoshone Bannock that basically built their own DIY boxes. So yeah, there might be some different ways. Actually, speaking of who to invite, that is something that I'd like to get the board's input on. Is that like I do recognize that the manufacturers are going to have good information about how to use these, but I'm a little bit torn about inviting vendors to a scientific conference just because they have a vested interest in it. And even though I would trust individual people to do it, I'm thinking about the public perception of the recommendations that come out of a workshop might not be as strong if we're inviting. Now, I do think we could go to those vendors and say, who has done research using your product, and then find those researchers.
So who's using your product. Okay, yeah. I know they're not using Scotty down in the Cook Fuel right now. They're using some other kind they like better. I'm not intimately familiar with it, but I know they have a great success.
But the biggest, isn't the biggest problem getting the brood stock and dealing with the endangered species on a lot of streams with a lot of runs, I mean, genetically, as we're looking at it, it seems to me that's why it got taken away or wasn't any more funded, or Oregon Wildlife didn't give them the eggs. To me, that's the bigger question than how well they can work. It's the political issue of, I mean, right now, are we even getting enough wild eggs for, even the hatcheries we have? Those are questions that I think also need to be answered. It's just not the efficiency of the box itself, which I'm sure it makes a lot of sense. There's no question about it. But
what I understand, Steve, you can help me on this. The ODFW did a study back about 13, 14 years ago and said that raising them in a hatchery are more effective than using a hatch box. So it didn't make economical sense. Was a big part.
One of the reasons we did it so heavily in the 80s, like you said, Jack, we had a lot of hatchery programs up on the coast, and we had surplus fry because you always raised more fish than you could rear the smolts. And at the same time, it could coincide with the 70s going into the 80s, and the coho fisheries collapsed in the ocean. So it became, we have this thought, it was perceived we have an opportunity. We have these fish and we have this technology as far as streamside incubators. We have excess fish, let's try it. And it was very popular with the public. Very popular. But to my knowledge, we never saw any conclusive benefit from it. And things kept getting worse with coho. And then the ESA came and got more constrained, and
because they were being harvested at 90%, because there was no clip fish, you couldn't tell the difference.
But that was part of the ocean.
Habitat was terrible, which we've done a really good job of fixing. So there was a lot of factors besides hatchery fish or hatchbox fish that played into that.
But like I said, now you look at the runs we had, well, the last 3 years, they've overshadowed anything we had in the 80s when we were doing hatchbox.
I know back then when I was a kid, there used to be charter boats going out every single day, limited out 3 times a day. Every restaurant all up and down the coast was full. Every hotel was full. I mean, it was like buoy 10 at every port all along the coast. And then when they took the hatchery fish away, fishing started getting wet, however you want to say it. But now, I mean, I can take one trip out, have to turn loose 15 or 20 wild fish to get a hatchery fish. Because they only stock 220,000 on the whole coast now. They used to stock 12 million.
No, like I said, all of them come out of the Columbian house.
Now,
Yeah,
no, they still stock 220,000. I live in Tillamook. We stock 220,000 out of Tillamook.
yeah, but
I'm
I'm saying,
talking about in Halem and out of the traps.
no question, the production of coho on the coast, hatchery fishes, not what it used to be.
Well, we need to wrap this up, try to keep on schedule. Do you have any public comments are coming up next? Any of the public here or anybody online on Zoom?
I got one quick question. What are we gonna do? We're gonna have a shortfall on commercial salmon production. It's just not gonna be there. Somewhere along the line, these guys are gonna come back and wanna start putting salmon farms in. Either deep water pens out at the sea or inland pens. And they talk a lot about Atlantic salmon. I don't understand, except does Atlantic salmon, if he crosses with one of our fish, do they become sterile? What happens when these things get out? Because they've had a bunch of them get out of Canada.
I do remember reading the studies about that, and I don't believe that they're sterile. But don't quote me on that. Maybe somebody online knows.
They're not sterile.
They're not sterile? Oh, okay, that's,
But the big-
maybe not, I don't know.
Well, I mean, the big problem for that kind of technology in Oregon is we don't have fjords.
No, they talk about open sea deep water pen. They put out some articles from Washington DC about raising them out and over 100 feet, 100 foot, in deep water. And just the pen itself is 100 feet down. And my attitude is, if we have extra fish, if the hatcheries have extra fish, they might be selling those as a cash cow to these farmers. What happens if a Rogue River salmon jumps out of the pen? Nothing. What happens if Atlantic salmon gets out of one of these things? We got a problem.
About 80% of the wild salmon in Norway are net pen escapees.
Really? So they're native there, right?
And I think that would run a conflict here then with the OSA. We'd have to figure out some way, maybe keeping them from intermingling.
Well, I don't want to see them bring Atlantic salmon. I'd rather see them do our own fish of some variety. And I think that's coming because, let's face it, people want red things in the fish market, and they're not going to be there. So somebody's going to jump in and do something. I don't know what. But. And it costs a lot to ship them from all these other places, so they're going to be looking right here somewhere somehow.
Sea Grant has studied this sort of thing, and also the opportunity of land-based aquaculture.
That'd be good. That'd be the best.
Okay, anybody online for public comment? Okay, as far as the hatch box goes, bleeding, that thing is gonna be set here, so I won't let him forget about it. We'll let him work on the timing, what works best for us.
You mean Seth Eisenberg, right?
Sure, let him join in if you like. Okay, I guess that brings me to wrap things up here a little bit. First of all, I want to thank everybody for attending here in person. We appreciate you showing up. Looking to the September meeting, some ideas. We were talking about getting some update of what's going on the Klamath. With the dams taken out there and restoration projects. We even have a guy right here in our room involved in that. Probably help us out when we get time here. And we'll be reviewing the hatchbox business again at that time and getting caught up on what's with the recommendations, further discussion of that. The topic we discussed is geomagnetic effect a little bit before. I don't know, sometime we'd like to some discussion of that. I mean, Seth and I were just talking earlier, and we really don't know if they put these wind farms out here with a big old 20-mile cable bringing the power in, if that's going to act like an electric fence to migrating salmon or what. We really don't know. And you'd hate to see them put those things out there without knowing.
I understand it ruins the crabbing.
Yeah, we don't know. Earlier I was asking David Notes about it. He gave me a study down on San Francisco Bay. I think it was sturgeon, to see what effect power lines and things had on sturgeon migration. And there was some effect, not, it wasn't totally disastrous, but certainly there was some effect. And we shouldn't be putting those wind farms out here with cables running in without knowing some idea. I don't, that's not necessarily something we could take on. But some researcher might get some kind of funding to do it. Anyway, that's a potential topic to talk about. Ask around table, does anybody have any particular topics they'd like us to see if we could address? We also talked about bringing speakers in like Ian Coulter and then somebody to kind of discuss a different take on his summary of that. So we could have some other speakers brought in. We had a couple of really good ones earlier in the year. So a couple ideas. Anybody have any suggestions? We'd be glad to hear them, or either now or sometime during the next meeting. Just let Seth or I know what you'd like to hear and do or see on the agenda, and we'll try and work it in.
I'd be interested to get Bob Lackey to talk about salmon abundance historically.
Yeah.
I don't mean back to the 80s, but I mean back to 1880 or something like that.
Yeah.
Actually, their numbers are higher now. Historically, way back.
Okay, well, if there's no other comments, have a motion to adjourn the meeting. A motion from Ted. Do we have a second?
No, you go ahead.
Second from Jack.
I don't want to take the opportunity.
He's ready to go. He's packed up.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thanks very
Take
much.
care. Bye.
Thanks, everybody online.